The last thing I saw was his silhouette standing in the sunlight just before the old support beams came crashing down. "This will keep you cozy down here," he said, his voice low and almost tender, as if he was settling me in for a long winter's nap instead of sealing my grave. And then darkness, not just the absence of light, but a suffocating, crushing blackness that wrapped around my ribs and squeezed the hope right out of me. The silence hit next, heavy and absolute, followed by the bone-deep cold. A different kind of cold that didn't come from the rusted metal walls around me, but from the sickening realization that Marcus had abandoned me to die. 15 years, that's how long we'd been married. 15 years of shared morning coffee, weekend getaways, anniversaries that gradually became just another day on the calendar. We were a team once, or maybe I just convinced myself we were. I was always the scientist, the one with soil samples under my fingernails and sustainability reports scattered across my desk. Marcus was the charmer, all smooth talk and investor meetings. The guy who could sell ice to penguins until suddenly he couldn't sell anything at all until his voice just stopped working its magic. I should have seen the warning signs the way his smile turned brittle. When I talked about renewable energy projects, how he'd zone out completely during dinner when I explained why this discovery could change everything. Not just for us, but for clean technology development worldwide. I'd discovered massive molybdenum and rare earth element deposits deep in the abandoned Sierra Nevada mining district. Critical materials buried beneath decades of industrial waste, worth hundreds of millions, maybe more. I never thought it would threaten him. I assumed he'd celebrate with me. When I first showed him the environmental impact assessment, his eyes lit up, and he suggested we visit the site together. Just the two of us, like we used to do before his business started failing. I actually laughed, thinking maybe we could find our way back to each other. He handled the logistics. I prepared the geological surveys and sustainability protocols. The drive up into the mountains felt peaceful, almost nostalgic. We wound through forests painted gold and crimson with early autumn colors. I pointed out geological formations and discussed erosion patterns. He nodded and made encouraging sounds. We reached the old mining access road around noon. The location was isolated, about a quarter-mile uphill through rusted equipment and crumbling infrastructure. I'd marked the main shaft entrance 5 years earlier during an environmental contamination study, but never had the resources to conduct a thorough mineral assessment. That morning, excitement buzzed through my chest. The thrill of scientific discovery mixed with something that felt dangerously close to trust. Marcus shouldered 2 backpacks, mine containing standard field equipment while his seemed unusually heavy. I didn't question it. The hike took roughly an hour, winding past abandoned ore carts and collapsed processing buildings. I led the way, stopping frequently to test soil composition and document potential environmental hazards. Marcus stayed close behind, unusually quiet. When we reached the elevated plateau, I gestured toward the dark opening of the old mine shaft. "There it is," I said, catching my breath. "Devil's Gate Mine. The locals named it after all the accidents here in the 1920s. He didn't even crack a smile. Inside, the air felt thick and metallic, like old pennies mixed with damp earth and the sharp scent of oxidized iron. We switched on our LED headlamps. My pulse quickened as I moved deeper into the tunnel, running my fingers along the reinforced stone walls. And there it was, a dark, glittering vein running through the rock face like a promise. Molybdenum, pristine and untapped. My throat constricted with excitement. "I knew it," I whispered, my voice echoing slightly. "This is exactly what we need for the Clean Energy Initiative." I knelt carefully, collecting samples, sealing each one in sterile containers for later analysis. Behind me, I heard Marcus shifting his weight. Then, taking several steps backward, his boots crunching on loose gravel and debris. I didn't turn around. I should have. But I was completely absorbed in documenting this incredible find, until his voice cut through my concentration. "Eleanor," he called softly, "come over here. I want to show you something important." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. I turned slowly, tucking the sample containers into their protective case. "What is it?" He smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I'd fallen in love with. It was cold and calculated, like a predator sizing up prey. "Just come here, sweetheart." I stepped closer, my instincts starting to scream warnings. The beam from his headlamp cast strange shadows across the jagged tunnel walls behind him. He reached out and pulled me close, his arms tightening around my waist like a trap. "I do love you," he whispered against my ear, his grip becoming almost painful. You have to understand that, right? My breath caught in my chest. Marcus, you're scaring me. What are you doing? He pulled back just enough to look directly into my eyes, and I saw something dark and desperate there that I'd never seen before. I'm so sorry, Eleanor, but I don't have any other choice. Then came the shove, brutal and calculated. My back slammed against the tunnel wall so hard I saw stars, and before I could even scream, he spun around and sprinted toward the entrance. I scrambled to my feet, shouting his name, stumbling over chunks of rock and twisted metal. That's when I heard the first wooden beam crack. Then another. Then the thunderous roar as the entrance collapsed in an avalanche of timber, steel supports, and rubble. I ran until my palms hit solid obstruction, immovable and final. I pounded my fists against it until they were bloody, screamed until my voice gave out. Marcus, what the hell is wrong with you? Get me out of here! Silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then his voice drifted through the debris, muffled but eerily calm. You always cared more about your rocks and trees than about me, Elena. Now you can stay with them permanently. His footsteps faded away, leaving me alone. I pressed my forehead against the cold debris, my breathing shallow and panicked. This couldn't be happening, he wouldn't just. No, not Marcus, not after everything we'd been through together. But even as I tried to deny it, the truth settled into my bones like poison. He'd planned this from the moment we left home. Every smile, every tender word, every gesture of reconciliation had been a lie. I collapsed onto the tunnel floor, my flashlight beam dancing across the mine's damp, mineral-streaked walls. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped with metronomic persistence, counting down the hours I had left. 15 years of marriage had just ended with one act of cold-blooded betrayal. I was buried alive in an abandoned mine, and nobody in the world knew where to find me, or so I believed. I have no idea how long I stayed there, maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time becomes meaningless when you're trapped in complete darkness underground. Every small sound gets amplified into something terrifying. Every moment of silence stretches into eternity. I forced myself to control my breathing, to think clearly, but my mind kept racing in circles. I thought about everything my research team at the Environmental Institute expecting my report. The grant review committee waiting for my sustainability assessment, my younger sister who hadn't heard from me in 3 weeks, and always Marcus. My hands shook as I fumbled with my flashlight, trying to conserve the battery. I had maybe half a water bottle and 2 energy bars in my emergency kit. This was supposed to be a quick site evaluation, a preliminary environmental survey, nothing more. The light beam swept across the tunnel and caught something unexpected. Not rock formations or mineral deposits, but actual movement. I froze completely. There, maybe 25 feet away, a tall figure stepped slowly into the light. Broad shoulders, thick dark beard, and penetrating eyes that locked onto mine with startling intensity. For several heartbeats, I couldn't move or breathe. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought the sound would echo through the entire mine. Who are you? My voice came out as a broken whisper. He didn't flinch or show any sign of threat. Just raised both hands with palms facing me. Take it easy, he said in a low, steady voice. I'm not going to hurt you. He stepped fully into my light, revealing a battered camping lantern in one hand and what looked like a military-issue knife on his belt. His clothing was practical but worn, heavy canvas jacket, faded work jeans, and steel-toed boots covered in dried mud. Definitely not someone you'd expect to encounter in a sealed-off mineshaft. My name is Garrett, he said, and I think we might have a similar problem. I pressed my back against the wall, still gripping my flashlight like it might protect me somehow. How did you get in here? The entrance is completely blocked. There are other ways in and out, he said, but they're not easy or safe. You live down here? I asked, trying to process this impossible situation. More or less. He nodded slightly. It's been 3 years since I had any reason to go back to the surface. This place, it's quiet, and sometimes quiet is exactly what you need. I studied his face, searching for any sign of deception or danger. His tone was calm, almost gentle, but there was something deeply sad in his expression that made my chest ache. You heard what happened, I said. It wasn't a question. He hesitated, then gave a single nod. Enough to know your husband isn't planning to come back for you. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. He tried to murder me. Garrett's jaw tightened visibly. People do terrible things when they're desperate or scared, but what he did, that was premeditated and cold. He moved closer and knelt beside the pile of collapsed timber and twisted metal. He didn't just trap you, he deliberately blocked the main ventilation system. The air quality in here is going to deteriorate rapidly. We need to move soon. My pulse spiked with fresh panic. Move where? There's a network of connected tunnels deeper in the mine. I've spent years mapping every inch of this place. One passage connects to an underground water system that eventually flows down to the valley floor. But the route is narrow, dangerous, and partially flooded. We'll need equipment, food, and multiple light sources. But it's our only realistic option. I stared at him in amazement. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. His eyes met mine with startling directness, because I know what it's like to be on the other side. When someone you trusted completely just disappears. There was raw pain in his voice, something deep and unhealed that resonated with my own fear and betrayal. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I just looked at this stranger who had appeared from the shadows like some kind of guardian angel, offering not explanations or false comfort, but genuine hope for survival. Finally, I took a shaky breath and nodded. We began walking deeper into the darkness. The tunnel narrowed dramatically, forcing us into single-file formation. The air was cold and humid, thick with the smell of mineral-rich water and something older, more primal. Like the Earth's own breath, I focused on the steady rhythm of Garrett's footsteps ahead of me, solid and reassuring in the oppressive darkness. After about 15 minutes of careful navigation, we emerged into a larger chamber dimly illuminated by his camping lantern. It was like discovering a secret underground apartment. Makeshift shelves constructed from salvaged mining timber held rows of canned goods, basic tools, extra flashlights, and water purification tablets. A sleeping bag was rolled neatly in one corner next to a small fire pit, positioned directly under a natural ventilation shaft. The setup was simple but efficient, clearly the work of someone who understood survival. "Welcome to my humble underground home," he said with dry humor, setting the lantern on a flat rock. "It's not much, but it's kept me alive." I looked around in genuine amazement. "You've been living here for 3 full years?" "After I lost my family," he said quietly, crouching to tend the fire pit. There wasn't much point in staying connected to the outside world. I didn't push for details, sensing the depth of pain behind those simple words. I settled carefully onto one of the improvised stools, wrapping my arms around myself as the full weight of my situation began to sink in again. "I thought this was going to be a routine environmental assessment," I said, my voice flat and hollow. "Marcus suggested he could help with the logistics, said it would be romantic. Just the two of us working together like we used to." Garrett listened without interrupting, his attention focused but not invasive. "I actually believed we might be reconnecting," I continued, feeling foolish. "But he brought rope, demolition tools, everything he needed to seal me in here. He planned my murder down to the smallest detail." "Because of your discovery?" Garrett asked gently. I nodded, feeling sick. "The mineral deposits I found could be worth billions, especially for renewable energy applications." He saw dollar signs and debt relief. I saw breakthrough technology for fighting climate change. Garrett coaxed the fire to life, and the warm glow painted his weathered face in flickering gold and amber. "You saw hope for the future." He saw an escape from his failures. I looked at him with curiosity. "What did you see when you first found me trapped in that tunnel?" His eyes held mine with quiet intensity. "A reason to remember why life matters." I couldn't respond to that. The words stuck somewhere between my heart and my throat. The warmth from the small fire began to chase the chill from my fingers, but couldn't touch the ice that had settled around my soul. I sat in contemplative silence, listening to the gentle pop and hiss of burning wood, the steady drip of water echoing from somewhere in the depths behind us. He handed me a steaming cup of herbal tea brewed from some kind of wild mountain plants. I accepted it with trembling hands, grateful for the warmth. "We should leave before dawn," Garrett said matter-of-factly. "The journey will take most of the day, and we'll need every hour of light we can get." I stared into the tea, steam rising like tiny prayers. "Do you really think we can make it out?" His voice was steady and sure. "We have to. There's no other acceptable outcome." For the first time since Marcus had left me to die, I didn't feel completely alone. We departed the chamber while stars were still visible through the ventilation shaft. Garrett had packed our supplies with military precision. Canned food, water purification tablets, backup batteries, climbing rope, and a roll of waterproof canvas. I carried a smaller pack containing my geological samples sealed in protective containers. It seemed absurd to worry about rock specimens after nearly being murdered. But they represented more than scientific data now. They were proof of Marcus's motive and my rightful claim to the discovery. We moved through the narrow passages at a deliberate pace. My entire body ached from yesterday's trauma, and every muscle protested with each step forward. The beam from my flashlight revealed mineral veins threading through the tunnel walls like frozen lightning. Beautiful and otherworldly in the darkness. "There's a tight crawl space coming up," Garrett warned over his shoulder. "About 20 feet long. It's going to feel claustrophobic, and you'll need to stay calm. If panic starts to set in, stop immediately and call out to me." I swallowed hard, tasting fear. Tight spaces had never bothered me before, but everything felt different now. He went first, sliding into the narrow opening with practiced efficiency. I dropped to my stomach and followed, my breathing already becoming rapid and shallow, the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Talk to me," I whispered desperately. "What would you like to know?" His voice came back steady and reassuring from just a few feet ahead. "Anything. Tell me why you came to this place, why you stayed." A pause, then his voice continued, low and measured. "My wife was named Sarah and our daughter Emma. She was 9 years old. Brilliant and fearless, absolutely obsessed with rock climbing." The cold stone pressed against my chest and stomach, but focusing on his words helped control the rising panic. We were climbing in the North Cascades when an unexpected rock slide hit. I was trained in mountain rescue, knew that terrain like my own backyard. But I was positioned 20 feet too far from them when it happened. I winced, imagining the horror. "They were buried before I could reach them," he continued, his voice steady but heavy with old grief. I dug with my bare hands for 6 hours straight, tore my fingernails off, broke 3 fingers. I found Sarah's climbing harness first, then Emma's little pink helmet. My stomach clenched with sympathetic anguish, but I forced myself to keep moving forward. I left the mountain rescue service after that, left everything. I came here because I thought if I could live somewhere the silence was loud enough, maybe I could stop hearing them call for help. We emerged into another chamber, this one larger and more spectacular than before. I gasped, partly from relief at escaping the crawl space, partly from the breathtaking beauty surrounding us. The walls were decorated with delicate mineral formations, their crystalline tips sparkling with moisture like underground stars. Natural pools reflected our lights, creating an almost magical atmosphere. Garrett turned to check on me. "You okay?" I nodded, catching my breath. "Yes. Thank you for talking me through that. I really needed the distraction." "Talking helps keep the fear manageable," he said simply, and I could tell he'd learned that lesson the hard way. We continued deeper into the mine system. The further we travelled, the more the air changed, becoming cooler and more humid, carrying new scents and sounds. I sensed it before I heard it. A deep, constant rumbling that seemed to come from the earth itself. "The underground river," Garrett explained. The tunnel opened suddenly into a dramatic ledge overlooking a fast-moving underground waterway, dark as black coffee and twice as wild. The sound of rushing water filled the space, echoing off every surface and creating an almost hypnotic rhythm. Garrett pointed toward the opposite wall. "There's a narrow trail that follows the water for several miles. We'll take that route for a few hours, then attempt a dangerous crossing at the narrowest point." I peered down at the churning water below us. It looked powerful and unforgiving, like liquid obsidian in motion. "Has anyone ever successfully made it out using this route?" "Just me," he said quietly, "and hopefully after today you too." We descended the rocky ledge with extreme caution, testing each foothold before committing our full weight. The path was treacherous, sometimes barely wide enough for a single boot, with loose stones that could easily send us tumbling into the violent water below. Several times Garrett had to turn around and offer his hand, helping me maintain balance as we navigated past slippery, moss-covered outcroppings. I hated feeling so dependent on him. I'd always been the leader in fieldwork situations, the expert others relied on in the laboratory and the boardroom. But down here, my survival depended entirely on trusting this mysterious stranger. When we reached a slightly wider section of the ledge, Garrett handed me an energy bar and his water bottle. We rested in comfortable silence for a few minutes. "Do you think he's contacted anyone yet?" I asked, thinking of Marcus. "Started spreading his version of events?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering. "He's probably already implementing his cover story, telling people it was a tragic accident, that he tried everything possible to save you." I stared out at the dark, rushing water. Do you think people will believe his lies? Most people believe whatever story is most convenient for them, Garrett said bluntly, unless you give them compelling reasons to question it. I clenched my jaw with renewed determination. Then that's exactly what I'm going to do. He watched me with something that might have been admiration. You still have your geological samples? I patted my waterproofed pack, reassured by its weight and bulk. Every single one properly documented and sealed. The thought of confronting Marcus again made my skin crawl. Imagining his smug, self-satisfied expression when he thought he'd gotten away with murder. But there was no turning back now. I had survived when I was supposed to die. That had to mean something. Garrett stood and extended his hand to help me up. We still have a long journey ahead of us. The trail narrowed again, forcing us back into single file as we followed the roaring river. At one particularly treacherous section, the path disappeared entirely underwater, forcing us to wade thigh-deep through the icy current while gripping the rock wall for support. Stay close to the wall, Garrett instructed, his voice barely audible over the water's roar. Use every handhold you can find. Move sideways, never try to fight the current directly. We inched forward centimetre by centimetre, the freezing water cutting through my clothes like liquid ice. Every muscle in my legs burned with effort and cold. My fingers went completely numb from gripping the rough stone, but I held on with desperate determination. By the time we finally pulled ourselves back onto dry rock, I was shivering violently and could barely feel my extremities. Garrett immediately wrapped me in a dry emergency blanket and activated a small chemical heating pack. We'll rest here for 10 minutes, he said firmly. You need to warm up before we continue. I huddled under the blanket, teeth chattering uncontrollably, my mind still racing with adrenaline and fear. Then, quietly, I managed to say, "Thank you, Garrett, for everything." He didn't respond immediately, just sat close enough to share body heat while still respecting my personal space. "You're much stronger than you realize," he said finally. I turned to look at him, seeing something new in his expression. "So are you." He smiled just barely. But it was the first genuine smile I'd seen reach his eyes since we'd met. Somewhere ahead of us was the end of this nightmare. Maybe sunlight, maybe fresh air, maybe the sound of birds singing. But right now, there was just these two wounded souls in the darkness, helping each other find the strength to keep moving forward. By the time we reached the crossing point, any sense of time or connection to the surface world had completely disappeared. All that existed was the water, the stone, and the rhythm of our own breathing in the darkness. Garrett stopped at a place where the underground river narrowed dramatically, creating a natural tunnel barely wide enough for a person to swim through. "This is it," he said quietly. "We have to go underwater here." I stared at the current, black and churning like something alive and malevolent. "How far is the swim?" "Maybe 6 or 7 meters. It's tight and disorienting, but I've done it successfully before. I'll go first to make sure the passage is clear." I felt my heart rate spike with fresh terror. What if something goes wrong? What if you don't make it? His eyes locked onto mine with absolute conviction. I will make it. I can read the signs, the water flow patterns, the way sound carries through the rock. There's definitely air and open space on the other side. I can feel it in my bones. I wasn't sure I believed him, but I had complete faith in his judgment and experience. He sealed our packs in multiple layers of waterproof material, checking and double-checking every seal. Then he placed both hands on my shoulders. "Listen carefully. Keep your arms tight against your body. Don't fight the current. Let it carry you forward until you feel the upward slope. Then swim hard toward the surface. I'll be waiting for you." And then he was gone, disappearing into the roaring darkness with a practiced dive. I was alone again, completely and utterly alone. 1 minute crawled by, then 2. I counted every heartbeat, every second, every echo of water against stone. The tunnel walls seemed to be closing in around me. I clenched my fists to stop them from trembling uncontrollably. Still no sign of him returning. What if I'd been wrong to trust him? What if he'd misjudged the distance? What if I was about to? A splash shattered the oppressive silence. Garrett's head broke the surface on the far side, soaking wet but grinning with triumph. He raised one fist in the air and shouted over the noise. "All clear, your turn." I took 3 deep breaths, said a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, and jumped. The cold hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My lungs seized up completely. The world disappeared in a chaos of bubbles, pressure, and overwhelming force. The current grabbed me and twisted my body like a rag doll. shoving me forward through the narrow rock tunnel. I fought every instinct to panic, keeping my body compact and streamlined, my head tucked down. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours of terror. Then, suddenly, upward movement. I kicked desperately toward what I hoped was the surface, my lungs screaming for oxygen, and then blessed air. Garrett's strong arms hauled me out of the water and onto solid stone. I gasped and coughed, shaking like a leaf, but gloriously, impossibly alive. "You did it," he said, wrapping a dry blanket around my shoulders. "I knew you could." I laughed, though it came out sounding more like a sob. I honestly thought I was going to die down there. "Not on my watch," he said, and something in his tone made me believe that he would have died himself before letting that happen. We rested in a dry section of tunnel, sharing our last energy bars and purified water. The air smelled different here, less stagnant and oppressive, more like the living world above. Somewhere overhead, I was almost certain I could hear birds calling. I looked at Garrett with curiosity. "What do you think Marcus is doing right now at this exact moment?" He considered the question seriously. "Perfecting his performance." I nodded slowly, feeling sick. He was always gifted with words, could spin any situation to his advantage. "He's probably already told everyone that I slipped and fell," Garrett continued, "that he did everything humanly possible to save me. I bet he's back in town right now, giving interviews, playing the grieving widower with perfect sincerity. Then we're going to give them a very different story." We resumed our journey, climbing steadily upward through a series of narrow shafts and damp corridors that smelled increasingly of pine needles and fresh mountain air. As we climbed, I allowed myself to imagine walking back into town, seeing the expression on Marcus's face when I appeared, not as a ghost from his nightmares, but as living proof of his crimes. Several hours later, we finally reached what appeared to be the final tunnel. Natural sunlight streamed through a thick curtain of vines and undergrowth, filtered and golden like something from a dream. Garrett pushed the vegetation aside and gestured for me to step through first. The sun on my face felt like a miracle, like being born again. I squinted as my eyes slowly adjusted to real daylight after so many hours in complete darkness. The forest around us was vibrantly alive, pine needles crunching underfoot, wind moving through the branches, the complex symphony of genuine open space. I turned in a slow circle, breathing deeply of cedar-scented mountain air that tasted like freedom and possibility. Tears started streaming down my face before I even realized I was crying. Garrett emerged behind me, blinking and shielding his eyes from the brightness. "Welcome back to the world of the living," he said softly. We began our descent towards civilization. From this elevated vantage point, I could see a ribbon of highway winding through the valley and the distant outline of town nestled among the trees. Smoke was rising from chimneys, a sure sign of normal people living normal lives. It looked impossibly small and peaceful from up here. 3 hours later, dusty and exhausted but triumphant, we walked into the outskirts of town. I felt like an alien visitor trying to navigate someone else's reality. People on the sidewalks turned to stare at us. We must have looked like disaster survivors. Our clothes torn and filthy, our eyes still too wide with recent trauma. We headed straight for the local diner. I'm not sure why, maybe because I needed something familiar and comforting. The smell of bacon and coffee and ordinary human food was almost overwhelming after days of survival rations. But what stopped me cold was the television mounted on the far wall. There he was, Marcus, on screen, standing in front of our cabin, dressed in black like he was attending my funeral, speaking earnestly into a reporter's microphone. "It was a terrible accident," he was saying, his voice perfectly modulated with grief. "We were exploring the old mine when there was a structural collapse. I tried everything I could to reach her, but the debris was too unstable." I stood frozen watching this performance, my heart pounding with rage and disbelief. The waitress noticed me standing motionless and looked concerned. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right?" Garrett stepped forward decisively. "Is there a sheriff's office in this town?" She pointed toward the main street, 2 blocks down, right next to the post office. We didn't waste another second. By the time we reached the police station, I was trembling with anticipation and fury. The desk officer looked up as we entered, clearly puzzled by our disheveled appearance and intense demeanor. "I'm Elena Vega," I announced, my voice steady despite everything I'd been through. "And I need to report an attempted murder." Those words changed everything in an instant. They escorted us to a private interview room. Additional officers were summoned, detailed statements were taken. I presented my geological samples as evidence of motive. Garrett provided his eyewitness account, describing exactly what Marcus had said before sealing me in the mine. The sheriff, a stocky middle-aged man with intelligent, tired eyes, studied both of us carefully before speaking. This is way beyond local jurisdiction. We'll need to contact the county investigators immediately. I nodded emphatically. Please hurry. He's probably already moving forward with his plans. Maybe even filed a death certificate. The sheriff typed something into his computer, then cursed under his breath. You're right. Filed 3 days ago. He's also submitted paperwork claiming spousal inheritance rights to all intellectual property. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling nauseated. Then I need to prove I'm alive, and that this discovery belongs to me. Based on what you've given us. You've got more than enough evidence, Garrett said confidently. I opened my eyes and looked at him gratefully. For the first time in 5 days, I actually believed we might succeed. The next morning, I woke up in borrowed clothes that didn't quite fit, in a motel room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and old wood paneling. After 3 nights sleeping in an abandoned mine, it felt like luxury. Garrett had taken the room next door for propriety's sake. He knocked softly just as the sun was coming up. They've arranged everything, he told me through the door. Where? Back at the mine site. County detectives are setting up surveillance. Mining rights officials will be there too. Marcus thinks he's about to close the biggest deal of his life. I smiled grimly. Then let's give him a surprise he'll never forget. The drive back into the mountains took 2 hours through winding forest roads. The authorities had coordinated everything perfectly. Plainclothes officers, hidden recording equipment, unmarked vehicles positioned just out of sight. I rode silently in the back of an unmarked police cruiser, staring out at the trees and rocky outcroppings that had nearly become my permanent grave. Marcus had no idea what was coming. Through the trees, I could see his familiar Jeep parked near the mine entrance. A black SUV with government plates sat nearby, probably the mining officials he was trying to impress. I could hear his voice before I could see him, laughing and gesturing with that old familiar charm that used to make me feel so proud. Now it just made me sick. Detective Collins leaned forward in the seat beside me. We'll let him dig his own grave with words first. Once we have enough recorded evidence, we'll give you the signal to make your entrance. I nodded once, surprised by how calm I felt. I'd expected to be shaking with nerves, but instead I felt cold and focused. Hidden microphones picked up every word of his performance. It's been devastating, Marcus was telling the officials, his voice breaking at exactly the right moments. Eleanor was so passionate about her work, so dedicated to environmental protection. The mine collapse was sudden and catastrophic. I barely escaped with my life. I tried desperately to dig her out, but the old support structures were too unstable. He paused for dramatic effect, playing the grieving widower perfectly. She died doing what she believed in, and now I just want to honor her memory by developing this site responsibly. One of the officials responded sympathetically. We're very sorry for your loss, Mr. Vega. The preliminary geological reports are extremely promising. Once the inheritance paperwork clears, we should be able to move forward quickly, Marcus replied smoothly. Just waiting on a few final legal details. Detective Collins spoke quietly into his radio. That's enough. Time to end this. I opened the car door and stepped out onto the gravel parking area. The sound of my footsteps startled a flock of crows first, then gradually drew the attention of the men gathered around the mine entrance. Marcus turned mid-sentence, still smiling from his sales pitch. When his eyes focused on me, the colour drained from his face so completely he looked like he'd seen an actual ghost. His mouth fell open, no sound coming out, his entire body going rigid with shock. Hello, Marcus, I said in a perfectly calm, conversational tone. He took an involuntary step backward, his legs seeming unsteady. Eleanor, he whispered, like he couldn't believe I was real. I walked toward him slowly, aware that every eye was on us. Every microphone recording this moment for posterity. The officers began moving into position around us, but stayed far enough back to avoid interfering. I caught your interview on television, I said pleasantly. Very moving performance. You almost had me convinced you actually cared. I don't understand, he stammered. His smooth salesman's confidence completely shattered. There was a collapse. You were trapped. I couldn't. You caused the collapse, I interrupted, my voice hardening like steel. You brought demolition equipment. You deliberately destroyed the support beams and told me. And I quote exactly, this will keep you cozy down here. The mining officials were staring at both of us in complete confusion, clearly trying to process what they were witnessing. "We have a witness to the entire conversation," Detective Collins announced, stepping forward with handcuffs ready. "We have physical evidence. We have recorded testimony. Marcus Vega, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your wife, Elena Vega." One of the officials swore softly under his breath. Marcus didn't resist as they cuffed him. He just kept staring at me like I was a supernatural apparition that had crawled out of his worst nightmare. Which, in a way, I suppose I was. As the officers led him past me toward their patrol car, he made one last desperate attempt. "Eleanor, please, you have to understand. I never wanted it to end like this. The debts, the pressure, I was desperate." "Stop," I said quietly but firmly. "You sealed me in that mine and walked away whistling. You filed a death certificate and tried to steal everything I'd worked for. You don't get to explain or apologize. You don't get anything from me ever again." The officers continued walking, and Marcus disappeared into the back of a police cruiser. I stood perfectly still, watching the car drive away. I thought I would feel victorious or vindicated, but mostly I just felt empty and tired. I walked slowly back toward the official vehicles. The mining representatives tried to approach me, probably wanting to discuss business arrangements, but I held up one hand and kept walking. There would be time for those conversations later. Later, after the crime scene had been processed and the media had arrived to document the story, I found Garrett sitting quietly under a pine tree, watching me from a respectful distance. "How are you holding up?" he asked as I approached. I sat down beside him in the soft pine needles. "It's finished," I said simply. "The arrest is finished," he corrected gently. "But healing takes longer." I looked back one more time at the mine entrance where Marcus had tried to end my life. Now it was just a hole in the ground. Just geology and abandoned industrial equipment. He hadn't won. He hadn't even understood what he was trying to steal. "Do you think some places have protective spirits?" I asked Garrett. "Like maybe this mountain wanted me to survive?" He tilted his head thoughtfully. "I think it's not about the place. I think it's about the people who show up when you need them most." I looked at him then. Really looked at him. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. I had survived. I had been rescued. And maybe, just maybe, I had been seen and valued by someone who understood what it meant to lose everything and keep fighting anyway. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of frost and infinite possibility. I stood at the edge of Devil's Gate Mine, watching the first golden rays of sunlight spill across the canyon walls. The pile of debris that had once been my prison now looked harmless. Just another piece of abandoned industrial equipment slowly being reclaimed by nature. Behind me, Garrett was packing up our camping gear with quiet efficiency, folding tarps and stowing water bottles for our hike back to civilization. The forest around us was waking up birds calling to each other across the valley. Pine needles rustling in a gentle morning breeze. Everything felt vibrantly, gloriously alive. I took a deep breath, tasting pine resin and mountain air and the sweet possibility of a future I'd almost lost forever. For so long, this place had represented entrapment and terror and the worst betrayal imaginable. Now it felt like a threshold between who I used to be and who I was becoming. I turned around to face Garrett. His beard was catching the early sunlight, and his eyes were clear and steady and kind. "Thank you," I said softly, "for everything you've done, everything you've risked for me." He shrugged with characteristic modesty. "You did the hardest part. You never gave up." "No," I insisted. "You appeared when I thought I was going to die alone in the dark. You guided me through passages I never could have navigated alone. You trusted me when you had every reason to stay hidden and safe." He met my gaze directly, and I saw something new there, something that looked like hope. "I helped you because I believed you deserved to live and thrive." My heart did something complicated in my chest. Living, not just surviving. I remembered sinking into that underground river, believing the cold water would be the last thing I ever felt. But something deep inside me had refused to quit, and he had honored that stubborn spark of life. "I need to go back and rebuild my career," I said. "Reclaim my research, restore my reputation." He nodded understanding. "Whatever you need to do." We walked side by side down the mountain trail, each step taking us further from the nightmare and closer to whatever came next. At the parking area, my rental car was waiting exactly where I'd left it 5 days earlier, now covered in dust and pine needles but still functional. I loaded our packs into the back, then turned to face him. "Will you come with me?" I asked, trying not to sound desperate. "Back to town, to the Environmental Institute, to help me figure out what happens next." He paused, looking thoughtfully at the winding road that led back to human civilization. "I haven't been around people in 3 years. I'm not sure I remember how to be social." I swallowed hard. "I know it's asking a lot, but maybe it's time for both of us to try living again." He looked back at me and slowly, a genuine smile spread across his weathered features. "For you, I'd be willing to try almost anything." Tears pricked at my eyes unexpectedly. I reached out and touched his arm, amazed by the simple warmth of human connection after so many days of cold and fear. "Thank you," I whispered. We drove down the mountain in comfortable silence, the car feeling like a protective bubble carrying us toward whatever the future held. When we reached town, the streets were busy with people going about their normal morning routines, completely unaware of the drama that had just played out in the mountains above them. I pulled into the parking lot beside the Sierra Environmental Research Institute. The building looked exactly the same as always, but I felt fundamentally transformed. Inside, Director Hayes greeted me like I'd returned from the dead, which in a sense I had. He shook my hand enthusiastically and congratulated me on the evidence that had led to Marcus's arrest. In his office, I signed papers that officially restored my name to the mineral discovery and invalidated all of Marcus's fraudulent inheritance claims. The weight of false death certificates and forged legal documents simply evaporated under the clear seal of truth and justice. Later, Garrett and I walked through the Institute's halls lined with geological samples and environmental impact studies. I showed him the laboratory where I'd first analysed my molybdenum samples, the conference room where I would soon present my findings to the scientific community. He listened to everything with genuine fascination, asking intelligent questions about sustainable mining and renewable energy applications. "This is your world," he said admiringly. "I'm honoured that you wanted to share it with me." I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "And where do you belong now? What's next for you?" He considered the question seriously. "Somewhere between the silence of the mountains and the heartbeat of human community. Maybe here, helping you turn this discovery into something that actually helps heal the planet." My breath caught at the implications of what he was suggesting. This wasn't just gratitude or temporary companionship born of shared trauma. It was a conscious choice to build something new together, to step forward into uncertainty because we'd already walked through the worst imaginable betrayal and emerged stronger. Over the following weeks, I returned to fieldwork with a full research team, complete legal protection, and detailed plans for environmentally responsible extraction. Garrett stayed close, contributing his expertise in safety protocols and survival training for researchers working in remote locations. The Institute officially named the discovery Vega Ridge in recognition of my work and the circumstances of its verification. I accepted the honor with quiet pride and a deep sense that justice had finally been served. One evening, after the labs had closed and most of the staff had gone home, Garrett knocked on my office door carrying 2 steaming cups of herbal tea. Outside my window, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. I joined him on the small balcony overlooking the valley. "I've been thinking a lot," he said, offering me one of the cups. "About what comes next, about what I want to build with the rest of my life." I sipped the tea, savouring its warmth, and waited for him to continue. "I want to stay here to work alongside you on projects that actually matter. I don't know anything about environmental science or academic research, but I do know about loyalty and courage and finding light in the deepest darkness." A warm evening breeze stirred the air around us, lifting strands of my hair. I felt something in my chest opening up, like the mountain itself had finally cracked me free from everything that had been holding me back. "I would love that more than I can possibly express," I said truthfully. He smiled then, relief and hope and something deeper mingling in his expression. "Then let's start right here, right now." We touched our cups together gently, and the soft chiming sound echoed across the valley like a promise. I thought about Devil's Gate Mine, once intended to be my grave, now transformed into a symbol of resilience and second chances. I thought about this man who had rescued me, who had chosen to believe in me when no one else even knew I was missing. The world beyond these mountains was vast and unpredictable and full of challenges I couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I had reclaimed my work, restored my voice, and standing beside me was someone whose unwavering faith had literally saved my life. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above us, I whispered a solemn promise to honor this second chance, to live fully and courageously, to never again let anyone else's darkness eclipse my own truth. And I knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning.